If you're thinking about buying some used camera equipment, but you're not sure what to look for, stay tuned. This video is for you. I've received a lot of questions over the last 6 to 9 months regarding used equipment. Now, many of you want to know, would I buy used equipment? And if so, what's the best way to ensure it's in good working order? Well, to begin with, I've bought a lot of used camera equipment over the years, and I think it's a great way to go. It's a good way to save money. You just need to ensure that you properly inspect the equipment to ensure it's in good working order. Now, when this idea of the video came about, I thought this would be relatively quick and easy to knock out. And like I do with my other videos, I started to create a list. I wanted to ensure I stayed on point. Well, this list began to grow and grow. And as you can see right here, I have almost 3 pages of notes to cover. Now, I wanted to be thorough, and I know this is not all-encompassing, but it is most everything that is on my mind when I go to buy used equipment. So I really hope this will help you out. So let's discuss a game plan real quick. Now, I've broken this up into 3 different areas. The first one is basic questions. These are questions to ask the seller right out of the gate. The second thing is price negotiation. I'm going to touch on that and give you a little tip and trick on how to work that one out. And then the third thing is the inspection of the equipment itself. Now, keeping in mind that when you go to inspect equipment, there's 2 things that'll happen here. Either you're meeting that person face to face, or you're doing it online, like with eBay or Craigslist, something like that. So when we get into the inspection, I'm going to actually demo how I would inspect the camera gear. And so I have a camera here to do that. I'm going to also go over this list that I want to cover with you. And I'll try to be relatively quick with it. So feel free to play it back or to speed it up, however you want to work it. I also want you to know this. I'm going to take all my notes right here. And this has got all my talking points on it. And I'm going to put this in the description below. Now, if it doesn't fit, I'm going to put it in a text file, and I'll put a link as to where you can get it, because I think this is a really good list to have at your disposal if you're looking for used equipment. So with all that said, let's go ahead, jump right in, and have some fun. I decided to move outside because the weather's nice. We have the sun out. The temperature's probably in the 70s. It's good to get outside and take advantage of this weather. So, my first question, how long have you owned this camera? Now, I like this question, and I like it because it helps to paint a picture of the history of the camera. Now, the second question that comes right on the heels of this one is, are you the original owner? Now, if they're the original owner of the camera, you can also ask them if they have any of the original packaging. Now, this is always nice because it does help with the resale value of the camera, in my opinion. If they're not the original owners, then it also paints another picture. So that kind of comes into play with how long they own the camera. So maybe the original owner only had it for a month or 2, and then this other person bought it and they've had it for a majority of the life of the camera. The third question I like to get into here is, how did you use the camera? So everybody kind of gets a camera for a different purpose, but I think it's good to find out from that seller, did they use it for family photos, sports, landscape, that type of thing? Has the camera ever been repaired or maintenanced? Now, they may or may not tell you the truth on this, but I think for the most part they will. And it's good to find out if there was anything ever done to the camera. Now, it's not too uncommon for people to clean the sensors and things like that. I like to also ask the question if they ever used a filter with their lenses, or if they've ever had a lens hood with it. Now, the reason for this is the care and maintenance of the lens itself. Now, I think one of the primary purposes to a filter is to protect the glass. So if they've had a filter on it, that's a good sign in my opinion. Now, the next question I like to ask is, what's the shutter count? Now, this one's important, and if they don't have it, they should definitely get it, because any potential buyer will want to know this. Every manufacturer rates their cameras and the shutter mechanism for a certain life. some of these Nikon cameras and Canon cameras, they might be at 100,000, some are 150,000, so it's important to find this out. Now, if you're talking to the seller and they're not quite sure, one thing they may want to do, and I've got this in my notes right here, is they can use a site like camerashuttercount.com. And this is a site, and there's a few other ones out there like this, but you can take a picture with your camera, and it predominantly works with Nikons and a few other brands out there. I know on some Canons it'll work with, some it doesn't. But nonetheless, you can take a picture, a JPEG picture, upload it to the site, and the shutter count is embedded in the image itself, so it can read that information. And that's just really helpful. So if you're talking to the seller and they're not quite sure, point them in that direction. And if that site doesn't help them out, I would advise them to get to a camera shop and see if they can find out for them. It's really important. Last but not least, ask the question why they're selling. I always like this. Now, they can make up any answer they want, but you can kind of read into that answer and get a little better picture as to why they're getting rid of this camera. Maybe they just don't use it that much, and there are a lot of people that are like that. Okay, so that kind of rounds up my basic questions, and with the answers to those questions, I feel that you're ready to get into the negotiation on the price. Now, I like to negotiate the price right after I have these answers, and the reason for this is you want to do this before you get into the inspection. Why? Because you want to level set what you're willing to pay and what they're willing to accept before you go any further. Just my 2 cents. So let's go ahead and jump into the negotiations. When it comes to negotiation, always know that it never hurts to ask for a lower price. Now, I've said this to a lot of my friends and family, and I'm a big believer in this. Now, I don't know of everyone's background and how they were brought up, but I had to fight and scrape for everything that I have, so I like to stretch that dollar just as far as I can. And something really important to understand here, though, is to always be respectful of the seller. Do not lowball them. This could just shut the whole deal down, but for example, if somebody wants or they're asking $500 for a camera, don't offer them $100, because I feel that that's disrespectful, and it may, like I say, it may just kind of shut the whole deal down. So just keep that in mind when you go into this negotiation process. Now, I have what's called the Magic 3. So what is the Magic 3? Well, I believe, and I've learned over the years, that you can really push 3 times. So what does this mean? Well, let's take an example here. The seller is asking $500 for a camera, and you ask your basic questions, you get your responses, and you might say, would you accept $400 for that camera? That is your first ask. And the seller may think about this and come back and say, well, I'll take $475. Now, you might look at that and then push back again to say $425. That's your second ask. Okay? Now, the seller at this point may decide to just hold ground and say, no, you know what, I'm stuck here at $475, but you have a third chance here. Now, this is in my opinion. So this time around, you might offer $450. Now, the seller may hold at $475, or maybe they'll come down to $450. But whatever the seller does, it's important to understand that that's your third ask, and that's probably the lowest that you're going to be able to get them, and that level sets your whole negotiation. At that point, you know you've come to the rock bottom price, and you can make a decision to go forward from there or not. But 3 pushes, that's what I always believe, and that's what's always worked for me. So just something to think about there. Okay, so that is all I really have on the negotiation front. And with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and step into the inspection side of this. So to begin with, there are 2 camps here. If you're buying online and you're using something like eBay or Craigslist, then you're going to have to try and do this remotely. And this is obviously not the most advantageous way to go. If you can meet someone face-to-face, that's much better. But if you're going remote, here are some of my tips and my suggestions. To begin with, try to speak to the seller on the phone and conduct a deeper dive to some of those answers on those basic questions. Now, I believe in really trying to do that phone conversation because it helps to establish legitimacy. Now, providing you have their phone number, cross-reference that number on Google And what you want to look for here is the area code and the seller's location. Now this may not always match up, and they might be kind of close. In the United States, they might be in the same state, but it's not always the case. Some people move around and they keep their old numbers, and that's perfectly understandable. But it is just one thing to take a look at. The other thing to look for is when you Google that number, is see if anything unusual comes up about the phone number, because you just never know. Someone else may have reported that number as a scam alert somewhere, and you might see it. So just something to take a look at. The other thing to do is ask for real-time images. So what you may want to do is just reach out to them and ask for a picture of the camera itself with the seller in that picture. It just proves that they actually have the camera in their possession, and that's always good. Some sellers will use stock images of that equipment, and it kind of leaves you wondering whether or not they really own it. So get a picture of them with the equipment. It always helps. And most sellers won't have a problem with this. Now, the other thing you can do is this. If you're buying expensive gear, consider asking them to take it to a local camera shop. Now, if you know where they're located, you can call the camera shop ahead of time and ask them if they would inspect the camera for you. And then you can ask the seller to run that camera down there. Now they may do this for free, but if not a huge deal. Just be willing to pay a little bit of extra. I mean, keeping in mind it's expensive equipment, so it might be well worth it for you to pay a little more to have a local camera shop inspect that for you. Okay, so I make a comment here saying only do this if you're serious, and that's kind of obvious here. So you don't want to waste anyone's time, and you only want to go there if you're really serious about buying this camera. Okay, so if buying from eBay or an online auction site like that, try to look for their history. That's kind of obvious, but look to see if they have any feedback on them. And the other thing you can do is ask for their name and any social sites that they might be on. Now, I think most legitimate sellers won't have a problem with this, but see if they're on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, that kind of thing. It just helps to establish the legitimacy of that seller and lets you know that this is a real deal and things are good to go. Also, ask for a few sample images from the camera. Now, if you can get those in RAW, that's even better. But if they can email those to you, then you can look at that image, and if it's in RAW, you can do a deep dive on the image and see how that sensor looks. And last but not least, it comes to making payment. So when you're making payments and you're purchasing online, check to see if your source of payment offers any kind of fraud protection. Now, I know PayPal will do this to some extent, but if you're paying with a credit card, a lot of times the credit card companies will offer this as well. Now, that kind of rounds up when you're going remote, and what I want to do right now is I'm going to jump in and we're going to demo how to inspect the camera itself. So if you are meeting with someone face-to-face, what does that look like? So let's go ahead and jump in on that. I'm back outside, and I've had a lot of activity after making that last clip, and it's getting a little darker out, but as the sun sets, it's nice and calm out here. So I thought I'd come out here to finish up this video. And I've been trying to figure out the best way to go over this face-to-face inspection, considering I have a lot to cover here. But as I think about it, I'm going to give you access to all of these notes, and what I'm going to do is just touch on a few highlights, and I'm going to step right into the demo, and we'll just go from there. So to begin with, I always like to ask the seller for a fully charged battery. And always bring a memory card, and if you can, bring a magnifying glass with you. I'll show you why in just a minute. You want to enter the menu system. You want to check all the buttons. You want to check the dials. You want to take the battery out and look for corrosion inside the compartment. You want to look at all the little ports too. Open up the little flaps. You can use that magnifying glass to take a close look at all of that. And again, I'll step through that in just a minute. You also want to take the lens off and look at the connections with the lens. That's providing the lens is being sold with the unit. You also want to take a look at the mirror and the sensor. And again, I'm going to step into that as well. And one thing I want to mention before I forget is that if you go to do a face-to-face inspection and you're bringing money to actually buy this camera, be very careful with this. And it is always prudent, if you can, to meet at a police station. It's something that we talk about quite a bit, especially here in the United States. And if you're in another country, just remember to meet in a public place with a lot of people, and that way you'll be safe. Bring a friend if you can. Okay, so with that said, I'm going to go ahead and just do a quick demo here. So using this camera, let's just say I'm going to buy this camera and I'm going to inspect it. The first thing I'm going to do is ensure the camera's turned off, and I like to start from the left to the right. And as mentioned, I like to go through all the buttons here, and I'm just pushing the buttons right now. And I'm feeling if anything doesn't feel right, if there's any kind of resistance or there's some shake in the buttons. I'm going through the back, the pads here. I'm opening up all the little flaps here on the side. I'm taking a close look at these ports with this magnifying glass. And again, I'm looking for anything that might be off. Maybe there's something jammed in the port, or maybe it's corroded, it's dirty, things like that. That's really what you want to look for here. And again, you can do the same thing with the battery. Now, I'm going to go ahead and put my memory card in here. And what I'm going to do right now is turn the camera on. Now when I turn it on, as mentioned, I'm going to go ahead and step through the menu system. And what I'm really doing is just testing the pad here on the back. And I want to look for all the sub-menus. I want to be sure that everything's in order and there's nothing really out of sorts here. Now if you can, go ahead and put this in Jpeg mode. Now I shoot in RAW all the time. You can do RAW plus Jpeg if you want. But because I have my memory card in here, I'm going to take a few shots and I'm going to take that with me. That'll allow me to upload that image to one of these other sites that I'll post below. But it'll hopefully verify that shutter count. And again, it's only good on a handful of cameras. It's not all the cameras, but it is helpful, and it's just one more thing you can have. So with it in JPEG, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a couple things here. One thing I want to do is move into manual mode, and I'm going to use something like a fast shutter, like 1/100th of a second. And all I'm going to do is just cover the lens, take a shot. That's it. I'm going to look at the back here, and I'm going to look for any pixels that might be out of sorts. Now I'm going to do the opposite as well. I'm going to increase the shutter speed to like 3 or 4 seconds. I'm going to try to point this at something relatively bright. Don't worry about the focus at this point, and just take a shot. And the idea behind this is that you get a very bright image, and again, you're looking for any sort of pixels that might be out of sorts here. So everything looks relatively good at this point. The other thing I'm going to do is check focus. Now when you get a camera, you know I like back button focus, but it's not set up here. But I'm going to use my shutter button. I'm just going to push halfway down, take a shot, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to look to see that the image is relatively acceptable from a sharpness perspective. I just want to ensure that the autofocus is working. That's the big thing you want to do right there. The other thing you want to do is the continuous shot mechanism, so the high-speed shooting. Move into that, and while you're in JPEG or RAW, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter even what you're shooting at, really. But I'm in manual mode, and I'm going to speed my shutter back up. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to move this into something like 1/100th of a second, and just hold the button down. And I want to test to see if the camera is firing consistently, and it looks good, and things look fine, so that tells me that that's working. I feel pretty good at this point, and what I'm going to do is turn the camera off, and then I'm going to take the lens off. So I'm going to pull the lens off here and set it down. Now, the mirror is locked down right now, and all I'm going to do is use my magnifying glass and look at the mirror. I'm looking for any sort of pits, cracks, scratches, anything like that, and I don't really see anything, so I think I'm in good shape here. Next thing I want to do is look at the sensor. What's the best way to do that? Some cameras will lock the mirror up so you can do that. Another thing you can do is when you're in manual mode, if I can move into bulb mode. So bulb mode is when you can take the camera, and what it will do is you move all the way out to like 30 seconds. Go as slow as you can on the camera, and one pass usually gets you into bulb mode. Well, bulb mode allows you to push the shutter down, hold it down, it'll lock the mirror up, and it'll expose the sensor. So I'm going to do that now. Mirror's up, and I'm just going to look down on the sensor, and what I'm looking for is anything that looks out of sorts. Maybe there's some dust or dirt on that sensor, anything like that. So this looks relatively good here. The other thing I'm going to do with the lens is I'm going to inspect this closely, providing that the lens is part of the sale. I'm just looking right here on the connections of the lens. I want to be sure that everything's in order and nothing looks like it's out of sorts. Now I can use my magnifying glass and check it as well, just like this. And what you're really looking for is okay to have a little dust in there. I mean, it's not a huge thing, because you can usually clean that out, but just inspect it. And then what you want to do is if you have a zoom on the zoom, a zoom on the lens, go ahead and just twist it. You see how it's coming up? Just feel that it's nice and smooth, and then it's not rubbing and you don't have any sort of problems with it, and you're typically in pretty good shape. I'm going to go ahead and reconnect the lens to the body here. And one more thing you may want to do is you can take, if it has a manual focus override on the lens, go ahead and activate that, take a shot, and see that the manual focus is working on the lens. Again, that's if you have a lens that's part of the sale. Now, I covered a lot right there, and I might have missed a few things, but keeping in mind with the notes, they're a lot more detailed, so feel free to take a close look at those. In addition, if you have any questions or anything like that, be sure to post them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to help you out. And you may have a few additions. If they're good, I may just add them to the list as we go along. Now, before I close, I do want to mention that I did recently open an Instagram account. Many of you have asked me about it, and I thought it'd be fun to go ahead and do it. My handle is Real World Pics, P-I-C-T-S. Now, I'll post a link in the description below. If you want to follow me, go ahead. And I plan to post a lot of fun, hopefully creative photos out there, and we'll just have a good time with it. So, with that said, if you haven't done so, subscribe to the channel. It's called Real World. More often than not, I post videos about photography and technology, but you never know. So until the next video, take care of yourself and be safe.